You're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled The War of Silent Stars. The war ceased the moment they saw a human eat what once defeated them. HFY sci-fi short stories. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now, we begin. Space was not quiet anymore. It had not been quiet since the first beacon went dark above Elira's Pearl, and the last song of the merchant caravans clipped off mid-breath. It was not quiet when the battle hymns of 12,000 species collided and scattered like broken glass. It was not quiet when stars flared, dimmed, and died, as if embarrassed that mortals had learned to drag them into war. But there is a silence that is not absence. There is a silence that listens. They named it the War of Silent Stars because one day the chatter stopped, the alliances stopped, the propaganda, the boasts, the pleas, the cries stopped. Fleets drifted without orders. Armadas slept with their eyes open. No one remembered who started it. Everyone remembered how it felt, like the galaxy had taken a breath that wouldn't let go. In that breath, a single ship crossed a graveyard and refused to be buried. The Solace. Not a dreadnought, not a cruiser in an admiralty's ledger with gold trim and long speeches. A worker's ship rebuilt by the hands that needed it, angled plates over welded scars, cannons grafted to cargo rails, thrusters 3 generations too old and twice as stubborn. 9 humans aboard. 9 fragments of a broken homeworld that had learned to move without a sky. Captain Mira Voss stood with her boots maglocked to the deck and one palm on the rail, steadying herself not against the ship, but against the quiet beyond it. She was not tall, but she seemed tall because grief had drawn her spine straight and focus had filed her down to an edge. The bridge was a ring of soft amber and humming screens. Outside the glass, a forest of ruined hulls tilted in black water. "Still nothing?" she asked, voice low as if the graveyard could hear. Lieutenant Harper thin, wiry, eyes that could look tired and amused at the same time, tapped a knuckle against the sensor cradle. Ghosts, defunct power, dust that hasn't learned its dust yet. Bodies, he paused, everywhere. Mira let the breath out slowly. Name the ship. Harper blinked. Which one? She nodded toward the nearest hull, a crescent with ribs showing, fins like a sleeping whale, whole continents of armor peeled back. That one. He squinted at the registry. Coron Thal, Vexarian diaspora carrier. They were ferrymen. They evacuated planets during the first surge. He swallowed. Ran out of prayers, I think. The Solace threaded between the dead. The ship's AI, Solara, spoke in a voice like wind over glass. "Captain, microfracture bloom at R12. Recommend vector shift." "Shift it," Mira said. Solara adjusted. The Solace slid past a spear of alloy the size of a cathedral. On its broken edge was a smear of something that had once been alive and bright. It glittered blue, then dimmed. Harper said, "You ever think we're the last ones? And this is it. 9 and a ship with a good name." Mira didn't look at him. "No, you sound sure." "I have to be." He nodded. "Fair." They were scavengers by necessity, couriers by habit, soldiers by accident, and something else by birth that couldn't be trained away. Human, which meant you kept moving until the void blinked first. The Solace was following a rumor that had outlived those who whispered it. Somewhere in the Orion Verge, at the broken ring girdling a dead star, the war had learned why wars end. They found the ring at the end of a long corridor of night, a metallic halo around a soot-black sun that no longer warmed even its own bones. The Varan ring had once housed 1 billion lives. Its interior had been a garden of cultures, a necklace of cities hovering in the shadow of a star. Now the ring was torn open. Segments hung like teeth knocked out. The ring's spine showed, and through that wound, a frozen river of debris spilled into the dark. Harper let out a low whistle. Then he didn't. The silence seemed to prefer awe without commentary. "Solara," Mira said, "map me pressure pockets, residual heat, anything that looks like breath." Mapping, drones prepped. Launch 5 slow spin. 5 drones floated from the belly of the solace, their lights dim, their motion gentle as if not to wake something. They slipped into a wound in the ring. Screens filled with corridors packed with dust that rose like fog in the lights. Chamber after chamber with murals burned away black, air gardens dead and skeletal, statues toppled without their names. Harper's jaw flexed. Life signs faint inside the core segment, or not life. Rhythm mechanical, show me. Solara magnified there. In the central vault where the Varan had stored their memory, a library arranged in spirals, a sphere sat in the dust. It was larger than a man, smaller than a shuttle. Its surface was dull metal pitted with use. It pulsed slowly as if tasting the air. Mira said, "Bring it in." Harper said, "We sure." He gave a lopsided grin that tried and failed to hide a tremor. I mean mysterious pulsing sphere in the ruin at the heart of a war no one understands. That's exactly what we bring home on a Sunday. "It's Tuesday," Mira said, and when Harper raised a brow, she added, "On Earth time. On Earth, Tuesdays were for laundry and terrible meetings. We can handle a sphere." "Copy," he said softly. They brought it aboard. The cargo bay felt colder with it there. The sphere's pulses played on the metal like rain. Technician Mahir covered it with a cage field and sensors like a man dressing a wild animal without touching it. "Solara?" Mira asked. "Unknown alloy, trace elements of collapsed exotic matter that should not be stable. Emissions not electromagnetic, not purely. There is a quantum phase noise consistent with computation. Captain, it feels like a brain." "Alive," Mira said. "Yes," Solara said gently, "and listening." "Let it listen," Mira said. "We'll talk after it speaks." It didn't speak for 2 days. In those 2 days, every surface on the solace learned the rhythm of its pulsing. It got into your sleep so that dreams breathed in time with a thing that was not your lungs. Harper started a pot of coffee in the mess and stopped with his hand hovering, as if waiting for the sphere to blink permission. On the 3rd day, the sphere opened. It didn't unfold mechanically. A slit opened like skin inspecting a wound. Light leaked from within. Then an eye looked out, golden, slit pupil too wide. To stare into it felt like standing too close to an engine. Its voice did not fill the room. It filled each head individually like rain you remembered getting caught in years ago. "Human," Mira didn't move. "We are." It watched her for 3 beats. "You endure." Harper muttered under his breath. This pickup line could use work. The eye slid to him and didn't blink. "You joke in fear. Good. Fear that walks keeps the feet warm." "Who are you?" Mira asked. "What are you, memory vessel?" It pulsed, and a taste of rust and strawberries washed through her mouth, and someone else's battlefield shook beneath her. Asterisk, I am the Kethold archive, last of the observers. Observer of what? Of endings. The sphere's light cooled. Of enemies that teach. Teach us what? What you already know. Harper swallowed, which is, how to starve a god. Silence again, the kind that waits. Mira said carefully, what ended the war? A beginning. Its pupil thinned to a needle. Images bled into the air, not as projections, but as memories pushed outward, so that everyone on the bay floor flinched and half-stepped because their eyes suddenly belonged to a body that wasn't theirs. They stood on a crashed plane of glass, whose glass had once been ocean. The sky rained knives. A smell like electricity burned through smoke. Shadows came over the ridge like a spill, not things. A hunger wearing skins as lazily as a wind wears leaves. Shapes that borrowed whatever they clung to, steel, flesh, stone, and made it useful. Teeth that weren't teeth, mouths like concepts. The swarm. They had 1,000 names through 1,000 centuries. Ashborn, Night Lattice, World Molders, Zynoth. The word the sphere wrapped them in was the one that tasted like absence. They ate, the sphere said without speaking. Not like mouths eat, like equations do. They consumed the fact of things. Only one species learned how to break the equation back. Mira steadied. Humans, she did not ask it. Hunters turned prey, turned hunter again. Your elders learned, your young remembered. You made hunger into ladder and climbed it. Mahir exhaled. We ate them. He said it like a confession. The sphere watched his hands as if reading prayers in his scars. You consumed what consumed you. You were the only ones who could because your blood is a stubborn experiment, said a new voice, bright and dry. Chief Medic imEvery stepped forward. She'd been listening from the rail, arms crossed. Human microbiome, archaic proteins, old Terran parasites that learned to teach our guts new languages. What Solara keeps telling me is chaos. I call rude brilliance. We are omnivores in a galaxy that picked lanes. Sometimes the only way to make the poison stop is to make it food. She looked at the eye. But we don't do it lightly. Harper whispered, we do it to live. The sphere's pupil widened as if that answer pleased it. You ended the war, it said, when other species saw you eat what once defeated them. The ones who could not imagine surviving like that learned that conquering you was pointless. Mira nodded once. Then why the silence? Why did everyone stop speaking? The sphere's light dimmed. Because the swarm sleeps when it is not invited. Language is invitation, strategy is perfume, songs are maps. You stopped singing, all of you, and the hunger paused, but sleep is not death, and some learned to dream for the swarm. Who? Harper asked. Children of those who feared the most, priests of absence, we call them the eclipsed. The sphere shuddered, not from chill but from memory. They learned to wear hunger like armor and belief like bait. They taught the dark how to listen. Where are they? Mira asked. The sphere pulsed slow. Here, everywhere, in ruins, in whispers, in ships that drift and pull pieces to themselves when no one watches. It looked not with malice, not with warning, but with the sadness of a cathedral that knows it is ash. They will come for you now that I have remembered you too loudly. As if the sentence were a signal, the solace shook. It wasn't a hit. It was a graze of attention. Lights flickered. Solara's tone lowered 2 notes. Captain, external field fluctuation, debris is moving. They turned. Outside in the window a ballet began. The dead started to cluster as if iron filings caught in a thought. Shards rotated toward one another and kissed. Wires reached like vines and braided without hands. A ship rib dented, bulged, and became a jaw. Mahir whispered, they're building them from us. Guns active, Mira said. Already, Harper said, hands flying, charging plasma. The first of them came into view not as a discrete object but as a suggestion made real. A body of shard armor with a spine of cables, engines grown like tumors spitting blue-white. The swarm didn't prefer forms, it preferred results. The thing lunged without thrusters firing like a thought leaping. The solace screamed as shields flared. Air tasted of hot pennies. Harper fired. Plasma burst against the thing's shoulder. It tore away and reknit in the same motion. Second and third inbound, Solara said. Fourth through ninth behind them, vectoring in a spiral. Pattern suggests, feeding, Mira said. On the dead, on us. imEvery strapped in at the med station, her hands steady because she'd trained them to be when her heart wasn't. Mahir shouted coordinates. Someone prayed not with words but with a rhythm of knuckles on useless wood. The sphere thrummed, too loud in the skull. Stop singing, it said. Stop being maps. Hard to do while they're chewing on us, Harper snapped. Then change the song. Mira's mouth was a line. She looked at the sphere. She thought of graves and kitchens, and the first time in her grandmother's story a Voss had learned that hunger was a teacher and not a curse. She drew her sidearm. The crew flinched, not away from her but toward the idea she would aim at them. She aimed at the sphere. imEvery hissed, Mira. The eye didn't blink, it looked relieved. Do it. She fired. The beam cut into that knot metal. The sphere split apart like a fruit. A spray of cold light soaked the deck. For 1 second every heartbeat on the ship listened not to its own drum but to the concept of a pause. Then the world came back. Outside the window, the hungry ships shivered as if they had hit cold water. 2 made a noise that was not sound but a taste like iron again. Their joints lost intention. They drifted. The others pulled away, not in retreat but like a puzzle folding itself back into a table of pieces. Harper gasped. What did we? Mira's shoulders loosened a fraction. We stopped giving them a mouthpiece. The sphere was amplifying us. It made our fear loud enough to cook with. With it gone, the recipe's wrong. Solara's voice was almost warm. Threat vector fading. Captain, you starved the idea of them. The solace limped. They put fires to sleep and nerves to lower chairs. They ran silent and cold and let the ring drift behind them like a story you don't repeat right away because your voice shakes. In the quiet that followed, Mira sat alone in the mess. The emergency ration bar in her hand had the taste and texture of resignation. She broke it in half and thought of what the eye had said. You ended the war not with victory but with demonstration. She thought of a thing, that when a predator learns the prey will eat it back, hunger recalculates. A beacon woke, not theirs, old, human. Solara whispered as if embarrassed to raise her voice. Transmission. It's patched together from a radio older than my models and a laser on its last polite request. Source. A planet not on any current registry. It must have been renamed or forgotten. Coordinates attached. The message says, Colony Delta 4, survivors, if you're human, come hungry. There was laughter in the background of the transmission, not joyous, not panicked. The kind of laugh that finds a friend in a storm and knows the storm is still a storm. Mira closed her hand around the ration bar until it cracked. Course set. The planet wore the scars of a meal interrupted, claw marks across continents, oceans that had learned to stand still. Cities eroded into anonymous shapes. Above the clouds, a piece of a dead ship turned slowly, tethered to nothing but habit. They came down in a valley of stone that had once been metal. A settlement crouched under ribs of a wreck, solid and tidy despite everything. Hearth smoke curled from vents. Wires strung like wash lines carried small baskets. And there, beneath a canopy made from a fighter wing, people stood, waiting. They were human. And not. Taller, eyes with a second pupil that drank light. Skin pale not with illness but with adaptation. Scars arranged like maps. They wore patched clothes and coils of wire and beads made from melted hull glass. They held tools first and weapons second. The one in front, a woman with hair braided into a crown, stepped forward. She had a face that had spent years trying to forget how to smile and had finally decided to remember. Welcome, she said. Home. Mira stepped off the ramp and something inside her chest jolted as if she had misjudged a step and found ground anyway. Harper followed, eyes everywhere, hands to himself. Imani came with a kit slung over one shoulder because care arrives with explorers or nothing matters. I'm Captain Mira Voss of the Solace. These are my people. We heard your message. I sent it to the dark, the braided woman said. I told it to carry you here if it liked you. It did. She smiled for real now. I'm Nara of Delta 4, steward for now. We're children of those who stayed when the motherships pulled away, grandchildren of the ones who ate. Mira said gently, ate what? Nara's gaze flicked to Harper, to Imani, to the ship, back to Mira's eyes. What the sky sent to teach us. She gestured. Come, there's a fire. Let's share the lesson. The fire was built beneath the keel of a ship that had done its last duty long ago and decided to become a roof. People gathered quietly, with a familiarity that said ceremony is what holds you upright when everything else tilts. They passed bowls and plates and pieces of bread dense enough to make your palm aware of its work. On a spit, a length of muscle turned. It did not look like beef or fish or anything the old Terran markets would claim. It shimmered faintly where the fat wept. The smell should have been wrong. It wasn't. It was wild and clean as rain. Someone in the crowd, child, maybe 12, with a scar shaped like a half-moon across the lip, held out a sliver on a stick. The child's eyes were solemn. Guessed right. Mira glanced at Imani, who lifted one shoulder with a you already know. Harper stared at the meat like it might tell him a joke. Mira accepted. She lifted the sliver to her mouth. It wasn't hot. It wasn't cold. It tasted like salt and metal and lightning. It tasted like a storm on a plain and the first sip of water after days of dust. It tasted like fear becoming a tool in a practiced hand. The valley seemed to listen to her mouth. She swallowed. It went quiet in a way that wasn't lack. It was a circle closing. Nara nodded once. Now you belong to the lesson again. Harper chewed slowly. He had accepted his own sliver without the fanfare of a captain, and he was crying. He didn't appear to notice until a tear fell onto his knuckles and he blinked, surprised that skin could leak sincerity. He wiped it with the back of his wrist. We really did it, didn't we? Nara looked at him. Did what? Refused to be food, Harper said. Nara's smile didn't change, but her eyes did. No, she said softly. We remembered that food goes both ways. Imani held her peace, her face a study in thought. She took a measured bite. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she said, there is something in this, not just fuel, not just protein. There is an argument made amino, a dare for a body to learn. Nara's people murmured, approval warming the sound. Nara said, every empire that watched thought we were barbaric, and then they realized we were brave. Then they realized they were not capable of the bravery they had just witnessed. That's when their ships turned around. Harper looked up through the cathedral of bones and smoke to the clouds above. That's when the war stopped speaking. Nara gestured for them to follow. She led them through a tunnel into a chamber drilled by hand and stubbornness. On the walls, prints and paintings and burned-in lines told stories. A human figure, small, standing in front of something with too many choices for a face. A hand offering a bowl, teeth bared, not in threat, in decision. Nara stood before a mural where ragged human silhouettes climbed a staircase of jaws. Before the war went soft and quiet, our ancestors captured a swarm thing and studied it. It tried to wear their minds. They cut its voice, kept its meat. It was poison to everything else. It was instruction to us. In our bellies it unraveled itself, so we fed. She looked at Mira without performance. We did not strip their dead for revenge. We took them into ourselves as medicine, bitter and precise. Our elders taught us to do it with prayer and rules and watchers, or it changes you without your choosing. Has it changed you? Imani asked. Nara held out her hands. The second pupils opened like night bloom flowers. We see in dark places where not seeing would kill us. You make it sound simple, Harper said. Nara shook her head. It is not simple, but it is clear. Mira placed her palm on the mural's cool wall. The eclipsed, she said, the priests of absence. They're still out there, shaping hunger into ships. Nara's jaw tightened. They came here once with whispers and gifts. They told us we were heroes and monsters. They left us a choice with only one outcome. She lifted her braid and showed a scar at the base of her skull. They tried to sow something that listens into our sleep. We bled it out and salted where it fell. They will come again because sleeping gods dream of being woken by applause. How many? Mira asked. Nara breathed through her nose. Enough, and they bring cameras. Imani frowned. Cameras, Nara nodded. The galaxy stopped speaking. The ones who love war miss the way it sings. They want a show, priests and princes, pirates and academicians. They will come, and they will need to see something that teaches them again. Harper rubbed his face. You want us to what, host a dinner? Nara did not smile. A trial. Against who? Against fear, Nara said. The plan was not a plan. It was a summoning. Nara's people lit beacons not with light but with absence, frequencies that made empty space go thin. So Lara boosted the call in a way that did not sing the way prey sings but hummed like a knife behind cloth. They sent messages on dead channels, coded in jokes from long-dead radio hosts. They placed snacks in the dark, information that thieves couldn't resist. The valley filled with watchers like clouds that forgot how to rank. Ships came not in fleets but in cliques. A Keyleth house barge with sails like wings of mica. A Phoric hive fragment that wore 3 moons as jewelry and pretended it was an accident. An Atron shard cruiser whose gravity well bent the light into a pout around it. Corsair guilds who had carved the sigils of their grudges into their hulls. Academics in needle ships that took notes with their running lights. The Eclipsed arrived last because arrogance knows how to make an entrance. Their ship did not look like a ship. It looked like a shadow laid across a burn. It moved only when you convinced yourself you had imagined motion. When it lowered into the valley, bones creaked and the fire hissed as if someone had thrown a handful of snow into it. They disembarked. Figures robed in black, hoods up, faces painted white with a single line down the mouth like a seam waiting for a puppeteer. They walked like they didn't mind if the ground didn't consent. Their leader carried a small sphere not unlike the one that had said do it. This one pulsed too, but inward as if capturing rather than releasing. Nara stepped forward. "Welcome," she said, as if greeting unhelpful cousins. The leader bowed the fraction required by ancient politeness. His voice didn't threaten, that would have been vulgar, it suggested. "We heard a rumor that the children of hunger had found their teeth again." Nara nodded past him to the assembled watching ships, to the balconies carved into bones, to the eyes peering with desperate boredom. "You all heard." The leader turned his white face toward Mira. "And you are the legend's echo, human original make edition of sorrow, Captain." He tilted his head like a wolf doing math. "You came to join the silence. That is wise, that is humility. Silence belongs to the devout." Mira met his gaze with her gaze, which kept its own hood down. "Silence belongs to those who earned it, not to the ones who would sell it as perfume." A ripple. Nara's people cuffed gently the arms of those who wanted to clap. Impressions matter. The Eclipsed leader smiled with half his mouth. The seam line winked. "We would show you something beautiful." He lifted the small sphere. It unfolded like a flower, pretending to be mechanical because poetry was sometimes embarrassed by itself. A mist fell from it, each droplet a vibrating yes to a question no one had asked. The air tightened. People shivered. On the far ridge, debris quivered. A cable lifted and curled like a finger. Two plates found each other and became a shoulder. From the mist, something began to assemble, not as frantically as in the ring, but with the languid confidence of a predator entering a familiar room. Mira heard the solace's hull hum. She felt the solace feel what she felt and answer with engine quiet solidarity. She tasted the sliver of meat still on her tongue memory. She thought of her grandmother's weathered hands breaking bread and the way hunger can be a table if you decide it. She stepped forward, hands empty. "Stop," said the Eclipsed leader. "Do not interrupt worship." "Not worship," Mira said. "Demonstration." Nara placed a hand on Mira's forearm. It was not to stop her. It was to say, "I am here." Imani stood to Mira's other side and looked like a doctor about to perform an unauthorized surgery with a spoon and a prayer and absolute competence. Harper stayed 3 paces behind because he knew the shape of the scene and his role inside it. Eyes, witness, line that breaks tension if the tension gets too big to breathe. The predator with the new bones prowled toward the fire. It didn't pounce because that would spill drama too soon. It strolled because it had never learned no. Mira addressed the watchers, not the Eclipsed, not the ship shaping itself on their leash, but the 1,000 eyes that had come to be convinced of something they already suspected. "You stopped fighting because you saw us choose survival over spectacle," she said. Her voice did not shout, it poured like hot water. "You were right. We will not give you a show you can package. We will give you a lesson you can keep." She reached down. Nara handed her a blade. It had belonged to a farmer before it belonged to a soldier before it belonged to a parent slicing fruit for a child. Mira knelt beside the approaching thing, and when it leaned, when it opened a maw that was a geometry problem masquerading as hunger, she did not recoil. She stepped forward like a dancer accepting a hand. She cut a strip from it. It made no scream. It had borrowed one from the air. It tried to return it. The meat writhed. It quivered. It did not bleed. It smoked gently as if embarrassed to be seen raw. Mira lifted the strip like bread offered to a guest. She looked at the watchers. Then she put it in her mouth. The world leaned. The watchers leaned. Hunger leaned as if affronted. Mira chewed. It tasted like an ocean at midnight when you are too far from shore and the stars have names you never learned but trust anyway. It tasted like metal warmed by sunlight. It tasted like hands that refused to let go of other hands and thereby built a species. Her body shuddered once. Not from nausea, from recognition. She swallowed, she breathed, she smiled. The thing built from stolen bones stepped back. Silence. Then the Keyleth barge's captain whispered into his hands, and those hands passed the whisper to the deck, which passed it to the sails, which passed it to the wind. Oh! The eclipsed leader didn't blink. His paint cracked at the corners of his eyes. Blasphemy, he said softly, as if speaking a diagnosis. Breakfast, Harper said behind Mira, and there it was, the laugh people didn't want to admit was relief. Imani stepped up with a small ampule. She held it up to the light. Polypeptides that fold like prayers and unfold like stubborn locks. Glyco chains that confuse thieves. A whisper where our gut flora have built a monastery. You keep thinking of battlefields. She swallowed her own sliver. She did not flinch. Think of kitchens. Nara lifted her hands. Her people brought forward bowls of something thick and bitter and sweet. We do not feast on fear. We do not make meals from panic. We do this with rules, she said. With watchers and waste accounted for. With parents who teach children how to cut only what must be cut and only with consent of the circle. We do not gorge. We do not hoard. We make medicine from monsters. A murmur like rain after fire ran through the ridges. In the ships above, something like shame and something like longing swapped seats. The eclipsed leader understood that theater had turned against him. He was not a fool. He was a liar who informed his lies with careful reading. He lifted his hands. The knot ship on the mist tightened its coils. It leaned again. It spread many-limbed. Fine, he said. You demonstrate. We demonstrate. He snapped his fingers. From the shadow behind him, two figures stumbled forward. Not human, not fully. Their eyes were wide and glassy. Their wrists wore bracelets that hummed. We brought you heroes, he said. We brought you former enemies who learned to be food. Today they earn quiet. The bracelets glowed, the figures gasped. Their mouths opened and the sound that came out built something by subtraction. The ground hummed. The ship of bones grew taller. The fire's flame turned inside out and back again, uncertain which way was consumption. Mira moved, not toward the eclipsed, toward the captives. She stepped into the hum. It tried to push her back the way a lullaby tries to pull you under when you are driving tired. She kept going. Imani went with her. Harper flanked. Nara's people lit their second fire, which wasn't flame. It was a hum that found the spaces the other hum didn't know it had. It was counterpoint. It was the sound of knives in a drawer organized by love. Mira reached the first captive. A phoric carapace cracked, skin gray. The bracelet vibrated like an angry beehive. She touched it. It burned her glove. She kept her hand there. Imani slid a slender blade under the bracelet, twisted. The hum writhed. The bracelet snapped. The phoric sagged, blinked, saw Mira, and a memory of being someone returned with an audible click. Harper tackled the second captive to the ground because sometimes medicine begins by hitting the floor on purpose. He pinned a wrist that tried not to be pinned. Nara crouched, flicked a wire with her thumbnail, severed a loop, and the bracelet unclasped like a bad habit deciding it had had enough. The eclipsed hissed. Not with theatrics, with surprise. The knot ship recoiled, its limbs faltered, its mathematics stuttered. Mira stood, breaths deep and steady as if her lungs had learned something. She looked at the leader. You want applause? He smiled faintly. We want congregations. You will go hungry here. Your hunger will feed us, he said. It always has. Mira nodded to Nara. Nara's people released sky threads, thin lines that climbed into nothing and held anyway. They tugged, and the eclipsed realized they had walked into a place where even shadows were tied down. The leader sneered. You will kill us. His voice tried to make murder sound provincial. No, Mira said, and it was the no that saved buildings from being built wrong. We will not make martyrs. We will make witnesses. She looked up to the ships, to the watchers who had come for an ending and found an instruction manual. Her voice carried because the valley had learned to carry honesty better than rebukes. You stopped fighting when you saw us eat what beat you once. You were correct to stop. You do not need to worship us or fear us. You need to follow this. We do not turn wars into pageants. We do not negotiate with priests of emptiness who sell your terror back to you at a premium. We do not build palaces of silence so rich men can rent rooms in them. She held up the strip of meat remaining in her hand, the one she had not eaten. It trembled. It wanted to be many things to her. She told it what it would be. She tossed it into the fire. The fire sizzled. Smoke rose. The ship of bones took a step back. It didn't prefer the smell of itself being taught manners. Imani's voice slipped under Mira's, wrapping it. We will teach you how to cut. We will put watchers in your kitchens. We will build clinics with knives that cure. We will write prayers that are protocols. We will license hungers that ask permission and deny those that don't. Nara spread her hands. Her people unrolled cloth that had names sewn into it with white thread, the names of those who cooked their enemies into medicine and didn't go mad. They hung it from the rib of the ship roof. It moved with the air like breathing. Harper cleared his throat. We will also accept donations, bread, wine, gossip, the occasional useful spare part. The valley laughed. The relief was a muscle learning full range of motion after being splinted too long. The eclipsed leader took a step as if to leave. He found his robe caught on something. He looked. A tiny hand held his hem. The child with the half-moon scar looked up with dreadful solemnity. The child said, "We do not tell your story the way you like it." The leader froze. He looked at the child as if at a mirror he wanted to break because it did not flatter him. The child let go. The robe slid free. The leader bowed a bow that implied nothing. He and his robed choir moved back to their shadow. The shadow moved. It didn't so much lift as detach. It left. The watchers left too, not in a rush but in a new arrangement. The Keyleth barge lifted its sails with a rustle that sounded like clapping without hands. The phoric hive fragment dimmed the jewelry moons and hummed a tune so old it had been invented by someone whose mother had taught them to be kinder than they wanted. The Atron Shard cruiser wobbled its gravity just enough to make a ripple that felt like an apology. The valley exhaled. After, around the second fire, because ceremonial fires always get a little food on them and there's no shame in making another, Mira sat with Nara and the elders. They spoke not as performance, but as people who know dawn comes and with it chores, and if you don't clip talk to size, it'll run all over your morning. Mira said, "We can take your protocol, we can carry it, we can seed it." Nara's eyes softened. "We hoped you would offer. We are good at teaching our children. We are less good at teaching those who love to pretend they have no parents." Imani had a slate out. She had been taking notes since the moment the sphere called her guts a monastery. "We can write the rules in a way that snaps shut. We can make test kits that turn purple if someone's pretending they're following the recipe when they are not." She was smiling the smile of someone in love with the idea that a small box can save a life if it's the right box. Harper was very busy telling the child with the half-moon scar a very important story about why he had once lost a sock to an angry ventilation duct. The child nodded solemnly at the appropriate tragic beats. "We will require socks as donations too," Harper added to general approval. Days knit. The Solace's crew learned the work of the valley, tending vats where carefully cultured bacteria learned to read and rewrite certain notes of the swarm song, carving from carcasses that had lost their rebellion, measuring with precision that said this is not a feast, this is a pharmacy, engraving labels that did not hide risk inside poetry. Mira learned to let her hands move without her thoughts needing to narrate. She had been a captain so long she'd forgotten how to be one of many. Nara taught her. Nara taught by doing and by letting silence teach when words would have made the point take offense. At night, the sky glittered with ships that had chosen to loiter. Some were watchers that had become students. Some were pirates who had decided to be ferrymen, because there are only so many times you can take from the same wound and pretend you aren't the infection. Some were admirals in exile who sent messengers with cautious, formal bows, asking for the recipe written in a script they knew their grandchildren could read. The eclipse did not return openly. But in the far hills, lights moved wrong. Nara's scouts brought back snakes of wire with teeth that had learned to be screws. Twice, a child woke speaking a language they did not know, their mouth full of static, and a manny sang to them in a rhythm that reminded their neurons what love sounded like, and the static washed out like foam. On the 9th day, Solara pinged softly in Mira's ear. "Captain," she said, "priority transmission." "Who?" "I don't know their flag, I know their intent." "What is it?" "Peace," Solara said simply, "and fear." Mira walked to the ridge where a line of stones had been arranged to look like a line of stones and also like an invitation to sit. The ship above uncurled from its orbit and lowered until its shadow cooled her face. It was huge and ugly and beautiful. All ships are if you love what they do more than how they look. It landed. A ramp came down. A figure walked out. He was human, or near enough that the bones under the skin sang the same rhythm. He wore no weapon at his hip, but the way he carried his shoulders said a weapon would not change his life either way. He stopped 3 paces from Mira and laid a hand on his chest. "I am Regent Haver of the last Concord," he said, and when Mira didn't react, he added, "The union that formed when the war went quiet and frightened rulers realized they were just employees of their people." Mira nodded. "I'm Captain Voss of no such thing, the Solace." He smiled, quick like a boy who had forgotten he once got to be a boy. "We need your help, you and everyone else," Harper murmured a little too loudly from where he had very skillfully been not hiding behind a rib. Haver's smile widened. "Yes, everyone else too." He told them a story. It was not new, but it had new clothes. As the war went silent, the Concord formed in dozens of places at once and realized they were the same gesture. Guilds and houses and hives and courts all changed their names at the same time and pretended it had been brave when mostly it had been tired. They built quiet corridors. They wrote rules about not waking monsters. They hired singers to sing not too loud. It had been almost peace. Then famine, not of food, of meaning. With no war to define them, princes went pale. Priests found their baskets empty because fear had not needed tithes when it had learned to feed itself. The eclipsed moved in as consultants. They offered curated danger. They sold boutique apocalypses. They whispered that silence should be chaired and meetings held in it and invoices issued. The Concord was fracturing, not with guns but with brands. "You have given us a story," Haver said, his voice not pleading but honest. "Demonstration yields policy. We need a covenant. Teach us to write it so even liars must read it." Mira looked at Nara. Nara looked at the elders. The elders looked at the cloth with the names. The names did not move, but the breeze did from left to right, which on Delta 4 meant yes. They wrote, "Not a treaty. Treaties can be translated into exceptions." They wrote a kitchen manual and a sacrament and a law and a bedtime story. They wrote it in scripts that could be carved with a dull knife, and sung by a voice with a scar, and transmitted by a satellite with a cracked lens. They wrote it into bracelets that hummed not to control, but to alarm when someone tried to move a meal into a massacre. They wrote penalties that weren't humiliation but service hours with knives and nitrile gloves, and a supervisor who made jokes you couldn't tell in church. Imani drafted the medical protocols. Nara wrote the rituals. Harper wrote the margins because margins are where people read when they are bored, and boredom is when mistakes are born. Solara translated it into frequencies that techs would remember when the power was out and they had to hum the checksum to each other in the dark. They called it the Covenant of Quiet Kitchens. The Concord's ships took copies. The pirates took copies. The Keyleth barge captain cried and insisted on leaving a sail in exchange, because you never take a gift without giving one, or ships start to forget what the word home means. The Phoric hive fragment left one of their jewelry moons in orbit as a watchlight. The eclipse did not attack. They tried other things. A famine ship dropped a virus into the valley that made everyone dream of a mouth eating the stars. People woke with their teeth aching. imEvery waved incense made of antibiotics, and the dreams fled not because the smoke was magic, but because the smell reminded the brain of kitchens, not altars. A recruiter came with a charisma machine in his smile. He tried to convince teenagers that making art for hunger was rebellion. They listened. They applauded. They invited him to dinner. He realized too late they had been interviewing him. He left with a pamphlet and a bruise where his dignity had bumped into boundaries. A black sphere, small and quiet as a secret, rolled into the water reservoir and tried to teach it to taste despair. It sank because Nara's people had seeded the water with microbes that ate despair for dessert and left sugar. In the 5th week, the Concord called, not Haver, a chorus. The covenant had gone out, and where it went it lay down like wheat and turned famine into baking. Yes, there were mistakes. A colony on the edge of lace space tried to turn the protocol into a monopoly and sell it back. A small war of letters ate their profits, and their monopoly died of shame. An admiral in the Rim built a kitchen and put guns at the door. His own daughter brought him a bowl and asked him to bless it. He cried and took the guns down because he remembered why he had become a soldier before he became a career. The eclipsed retreated. They did not leave. They circled, because those who sell fear always circle the places where fear is taught to cook. On a night when the moon hung low over the rib roof and the fire snapped because wood had opinions, Mira sat alone, the ship's shadow sleeping at her back. Nara joined her without announcing herself because friends walk with their names in their steps and do not need call signs. "You are thinking of the next thing," Nara said. "I am thinking of the one after that," Mira said, and Nara laughed softly because planning optimistically is a human sin that smells like hope. "The eclipsed will find a new method," Nara said. "They will build cathedrals with algorithms. They will tell people that kitchens are too dirty for holy mouths. They will paint us as cannibals because the word is easy in a lazy mind." "We will be called monsters," Mira said. She held a small strip of meat between finger and thumb, not to eat but to remember. "We will be called saviors, both are prisons." "We will be called cooks," Nara said. "That is a door." Mira smiled. "We will be called stubborn in languages that don't have the word for it." Nara said, "We will be called human." In the distance, a light moved wrong. Mira's smile faded. "They are not done." "No," Nara said. "Hunger never is. That is not the curse. That is the curriculum." What came next came quietly because professionalism wears soft shoes. The eclipse didn't send ships or priests or cameras. They sent hunger itself in the old way, small and unannounced. In the morning, Mahir went to the vats and found one with a skin of iridescence that shivered when he whispered to it. He called imEvery. imEvery called Mira. "A mutation," imEvery said, "not accidental." Mira stared. The sheen moved like a cat under a sheet. "If we feed this," she said, "we will be feeding them." imEvery nodded. "If we starve it, we starve something it replaced." Nara arrived. She looked long with the gaze of a steward who has buried children and knows that every decision tastes like metal. "We cannot burn it, it will learn our fire. We cannot ignore it, it will teach itself a song." "Then," Harper asked softly, Nara turned to Mira, "we eat it." imEvery's mouth twisted. "Raw." "No," Nara said, "with salt, with witness, with rules." She held Mira's eyes. "You were our demonstration once. Be it again." They gathered in the valley, not with watchers, with family. Mira stood before the vat. The iridescence trembled as if trying to look like something that would trigger mercy. She took a cup. She dipped it. The cup hummed in her palm. The hum made promises that meant nothing to her except as information. imEvery held out a vial. Culture, she said, the bacteria that learned us. If you take it with this, it will take you less. Mira took the vial. She swallowed. The world tilted, then righted itself. She dipped again. She sipped. It was not like the meat. It was not a story. It was a blueprint pretending to be a recipe. It tasted like static warmed by body heat. It tasted like a tongue trying on your words and not liking the fit. She swallowed. It hurt. She closed her eyes. She let the ache move through her without narrating it back. She felt a flicker in her gut, a cold engine trying to start where engines did not belong. It sputtered. It tried again. It found something waiting for it, the monastery imEvery had named. And the monks there said no in 1,000 gentle ways, the way you say no to a toddler who wants to stick a fork into a socket. The cold engine died. Warmth returned, not as triumph but as room temperature. Mira opened her eyes. Her friends were there. Nara had a hand on her arm again. imEvery's eyes were wet because doctors cry when medicine works as designed. Harper looked like he had spent the last 2 minutes promising something to gods he wasn't sure he believed in and had just realized the gods had shrugged and said okay then. Mira turned to the vat. You don't get to teach us, she said. We teach you. Lesson 1, meals are chosen. They processed it carefully. They wrote a new chapter. They sent it out wrapped in warnings that were honest and stories that were better. The Concorde received it. The pirates received it and put it in their pockets next to their maps and their regrets. The Eclipse did not receive it because they do not sign for packages they cannot monetize. Time, which had gone shy, came back to sit by the fire. The valley made new children. They learned to walk under a ceiling of ribs and never remain small beneath it. The ships above learned to come down for dinner without checking their guns at the door, because they had learned you could sit with your hand away from your hip as a brave thing to do. The solace could not stay. That is what ships do. They leave you before they become furniture. Mira hugged Nara, and it did not feel like the first or last time someone would be held that hard at that ridge. imEvery pressed a kit into Nara's palm. For when you want to talk to a stubborn lung, she said, or a stubborn idea. Harper pretended not to cry and failed with honor. They rose. They left the watch moon blinking in slow laughter behind them. They cut through the air that smelled of rust and rosemary and started back into the quiet corridors with a noise in their chest that was not radio, not engine, heart. The Covenant spread. It did not conquer. Conquering is loud and leaves stains that make children ask questions a little too early. The Covenant moved like handwriting passing between friends. It set up shop in mess halls. It lived in small clinics. It taught factories to build boxes with lids that snapped. It turned priests into cooks and admirals into purchasing managers who knew the difference between nitrile gauges. The Eclipse tried one last spectacle, because spectacle is the only letter they know to write in a world that has returned to cursive. They assembled a cathedral in the shadow of a collapsed star, filled it with air that tasted like an apology, and invited the galaxy to watch a martyrdom. The martyr did not show. She had gotten lost in a kitchen and discovered she wanted to learn how to dice onions so they cooked evenly. The cameras turned off slowly, embarrassed. Mira's hair went silver at the temples the way frost draws on windows in old Earth cities before children breathe on them and chase it away. Harper collected socks like a hobby and told stories about ducks with the fervor of a saint. imEvery wrote a textbook and addressed it to her younger self because all textbooks are written to people you hope still have time to learn. Occasionally, in a ruin someone had forgotten they forgot, a small sphere would pulse. Someone would bring a hammer. Someone would bring a prayer. Someone would decide which was needed. The decision would be correct because they had rules and because they had learned that thinking with your gut is not a metaphor when your gut is a laboratory. One evening, after a run that had taken the solace through a corridor of light where old battleships slept like whales and dreamt that harpoons were stories fishermen told to impress each other, Mira stood on the bridge and watched space pretend to be empty. She said to Solara, Do you ever miss the noise? Solara considered. I miss the jokes about the noise, she said. I do not miss the noise itself. I enjoy knowing an engineer is making coffee somewhere without a siren competing for loyalty. Mira smiled. Me too. The console pinged, not alarm, invitation. Message, Solara said, from Delta 4. Nara's voice filled the bridge. It was the kind of full that is not loud, but that reaches exactly the people who need to hear it. We planted a field today, she said, not of wheat, of small machines that hum a tune only children can hear. They laughed. Laughter is the opposite of hunger when it knows where it will eat next. Mira closed her eyes. She let the sound of it turn into a picture in her head, a field of humming things, a line of names in white thread, a fire eating only what it was permitted to. She let the picture settle behind her eyes like a map folded and placed in a pocket. She looked at the stars. They did not speak. They did not need to. The galaxy learned a lesson, and you could tell it had learned it because it didn't make a speech about it. It built kitchens. It wrote covenants. It ate its monsters by recipe. It did not let cameras decide what the holy looked like. And somewhere in a ship that was not famous and not handsome, 9 humans carried something so old it was new, a decision. They would not conquer. They would endure, because endurance is not just surviving. It is choosing what to become after you do. And so the War of Silent Stars became a story told at dinner. Children repeated the line with their mouths full of bread and their eyes full of promise and their bellies full of medicine. And that day, the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.